A modern classic on par with Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire, or childish wish fulfillment that ought to be shelved with YA fantasy. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss is an epic fantasy novel published in 2007. It's the first of two published books in an anticipated trilogy known as the Kingkiller Chronicles. If you've never heard of this book, you might be surprised to learn that it's a cultural phenomenon. It's sold more than 10 million copies, and yet it's surprisingly divisive. There are channels on YouTube that are practically dedicated to Rothfuss's world and the Kingkiller Chronicles, but it feels like every third review is predominantly negative. But before we dive into the controversy, we should back up and talk about the book itself. The Name of the Wind opens on an unassuming innkeeper outside a small village in a classic fantasy setting that feels a lot like, the romanticized version of the High Middle Ages in Europe. And this unassuming innkeeper is quickly revealed to be the legendary hero Quoth. And we don't really know why he's legendary, but we get glimpses in the form of his nicknames, which range from Quoth the Bloodless to Quoth the Kingkiller. The latter nickname obviously being the source of the trilogy's name, the Kingkiller Chronicles. So we're not sure what Quoth is famous for, but if his nickname is the Kingkiller, you can take a guess. The heart of this book is that a traveling scribe shows up to the inn and identifies the innkeeper as Quoth and persuades Quoth to tell him his life story so that he can get it in writing and set the record straight. So the entire heart of the book is set in, Quoth's youth. In the present, Quoth is like 24, and his story starts with him being like 10 years old. So book one kind of spans three distinct periods of Quoth's life. It starts in Quoth's early childhood, and then it moves to Quoth's being like 12, 13, and learning from the school of hard knocks, if you will. And then the third phase of this first book is Quoth being admitted to the university. He's still quite young, like 14, and the university is, a place of education focused predominantly on magic. Despite that summary similarity to Hogwarts, it's nothing like Hogwarts. There's several magic systems in the Kingkiller Chronicles, and they are absolutely nothing like the magic in Harry Potter. All right, sounds like a standard fantasy novel. So what's the controversy? Let's start with why people love this book, why I think this book is an easy recommendation. And that's it comes down to a lot of things. One is really fun world building. I think that the world itself doesn't feel very novel. Like I said, it's a pretty traditional fantasy setting, but I think the magic systems are pretty unique. It's a magic system that seems to have some pretty clear limits, and you have a good sense of the way that the use of magic exhausts the user. And also, in some cases, it's a fairly small scale magic. Like most magicians wouldn't be able to turn the tide of a war or anything like that. Whereas, last book I reviewed, Gardens of the Moon, the wizards, and this isn't a bad thing, but the wizards are incredibly powerful. Like if you have a good wizard on your side, that wizard will be able to take out 1,000 ordinary soldiers. This is not that. The magic is a smaller scale in the Kingkiller Chronicles. So you feel like you've got your hands on it. And the magic is primarily used for things other than fighting in this world. The world is basically at peace in the time that the tale takes place in. In the present, there seems to be trouble brewing. But when Quoth is recounting his youth, you get the sense that the world is largely at peace and there's an empire that reigns with a fairly strong hand and keeps law and order throughout the land. The fun of the world building is, the university is a fun setting. There's a few different regions with distinct cultures that you learn about. And, a ragtag bunch of young characters and authority figure adults that they get to rebel against, and a lot of the trappings of young adult fiction. And that is where the controversy comes in. So you've got a fun story, a fun fantasy tale in a cool new world, and lots of fans love it, think it's great. And then there's people who pick it up and go, oh, this is not serious adult fantasy. To be fair, this book has some DNA in common with YA fiction. It, first of all, the big one, its focus is a adolescent boy. And anytime your protagonist is an adolescent, it's going to be real easy to feel like YA fiction. And he's going to university, which feels like a pretty YA plot. And his immediate antagonists are professors who are strict. So that feels kind of YA. And then the big one is our protagonist, Quoth, is utterly exceptional. He is better than almost everyone at almost everything. He's the most gifted magician at the university, possibly in this world. He's incredibly smart, even at the very beginning of the tale when he's incredibly young. He's smarter than all the adults, and he's got this incredible memory, and he's also a great musician. And it kind of, you really quickly understand that everything Quoth tries, or at least almost everything Quoth tries, he's immediately going to be good at. On top of that, he's described as being attractive, and that's borne out through the books as like every woman throws themselves at him. So for all those reasons, two criticisms pop up a lot. One, that it's wish fulfillment. The other criticism is that it's well-trodden ground. It's just a boring chosen one story. Now, there's no prophecy at play in the Kingkiller Chronicles, but you do get that feeling that you've got this really gifted protagonist who probably is destined to save the world or something. You get that vibe, and it is a familiar vibe. However, I think those are very surface level critiques. I think that if you look a little deeper and you reflect on what Rothfuss has given you, it isn't just a chosen one story, and it definitely isn't wish fulfillment. I think that Quoth is a deeply flawed character, and I think he's an intentionally flawed character that readers are supposed to question. And it's not so much that you stand in the shoes of Quoth and go on a ride with him, beating everyone at everything. It's more like you watch this incredibly gifted person with this remarkable potential, and he abuses it and perhaps wastes it, and in the present appears to be actively wasting whatever potential he had. So it's kind of a twist on the chosen one story in that you're being asked to question and demand more of this protagonist. Themes. I think this book has some great themes. And the themes, I would say, are the responses to a lot of the criticisms. Youthful indiscretion and arrogance are some core themes in this book. And the abuse of power and also the squandering of power. Quoth is brave and a loyal friend. However, his somewhat cruel childhood leads him to be a pretty a morally gray young adult, or at least a young adult who has his own sense of morality that he is going to act on, and it does not align with conventional morality in a lot of ways. And Quoth is this 14, 15-year-old boy with these incredible gifts and talents, and in this book, he uses them the way a 14, 15-year-old boy would use incredible talents. He pursues girls, money, and spiting the people who have wronged him and getting revenge against the people who have grievously wronged him. That's all he cares about. He is not out to save the world. He's not trying to do the right thing. He is just out for himself, really. He is a self-centered character. And I think and hope that that is leading towards growth. And I'll get into the second book eventually. I'll do a review of the second book. But In the second book, you get explicit passages calling this out. And, Quoth's shortcomings are not something Rothfuss overlooked. He's very aware. Quoth is meant to be flawed. And I think it's fun that he's flawed in ways that aren't like the mainstream, normally when you have the gifted hero chosen one arc, the flaw is, they just need to have the courage to go for it. They have to accept that they need to like fight this enemy and then go after it. Whereas Quoth's flaws are in his character. He is, like I said, selfish, and he is judge, jury, and executioner of right and wrong in his own mind, and his sense of right and wrong is skewed. And so he is full of potential, but at this point, it's just dangerous, because what I think Rothfuss is doing an incredible job of conveying, that seems to be a theme in a lot of like superhero movies and everything, yet I think this book does it better because it's a little more subtle, is the idea that the most important attributes of a hero are not superpowers or abilities, but the character of the hero. It makes for an interesting story and a fun theme to go, I don't really like this guy that much, which is a criticism I've heard in a lot of reviews, and one I couldn't agree with more. I don't, especially young Quoth, I don't really like Quoth either. He's pretty annoying in a lot of different ways. He's not obnoxious, but he's not necessarily the most likable guy. He has very poor judgment. He gets himself into a lot of easily avoided trouble. And again, he's out for himself, and he doesn't have any respect for authority, and not in like a cool bad boy way. I mean, maybe a little bit, but really more just in he's so confident that he's the smartest person in every room, he can't hear what people are trying to say to him. And it's frustrating. My thoughts? This is not Lord of the Rings. And 100 years from now, this is not going to be spoken about in the same breath as Lord of the Rings. But that's okay. Most books aren't Lord of the Rings. There's a reason Lord of the Rings gets the praise it does. It's really, really good. And that's really hard to pull off. But hey, this book, Name of the Wind, and the Kingkiller Chronicles thus far are also really good. I didn't just tear through the early chapters of the Fellowship, like the introduction to the Shire and Bilbo's party and everything. Those are great, wonderful passages, and so much of the stakes of the book come from, introducing you to the world in the way that Tolkien does. But it's not the most riveting thing I've ever read. And Name of the Wind, honestly, is one of the most riveting things I've ever read. It reminded me of when I was a kid, when I was really young. I pretended to be sick so that I could stay home from school and finish reading Aragon. And I have not had that feeling for a long time. And this book gave me that feeling. And yeah, that is because of a lot of the elements it has in common with YA fiction. But this is not YA fiction. It is a smaller scope than Lord of the Rings or Song of Ice and Fire, because it just follows one guy's life, and it's his impact on the people around him and the world around him. It's fun to follow a hero who's great at a lot of things. And maybe there is some wish fulfillment buried in there, and maybe that is part of the fun. However, there's a lot of YA fiction out there, and I don't enjoy any of it anymore, in the same way that I don't really like candy bars anymore. What makes me engage with this book is the fact that this character is deeply flawed in ways that I find unconventional. They're not the stereotypical heroic flaws that you see all the time. Another thing that makes this book really good, the prose, and even the detractors of Name of the Wind will quickly admit that Rothfuss is a very good writer. He's very talented. His prose have great momentum. That's what makes the book easy to devour. You're compelled forward. It's a really easy read. Everything he's depicting is depicted sufficiently well that you just see it in your head as the words fly off the page into your eyeballs. And sometimes the book gets poetic. There are scenes that there's practically a rhyme scheme to Quoth's interaction with his love interest. And I think that's a fun, cool touch. And I haven't seen anything quite like it before because it's a subtle rhyme scheme. It's not that the book suddenly converts into a poem, but it's just a fun way to put chemistry on the page, to have this like subtle rhyming back and forth between would-be lovers. With all that said, my rating, 8 out of 10 bicorns, because flawed but fun characters, even though they're unlikable in some ways. At least Quoth is unlikable in some ways. It's balanced out by other very likable characters and some interesting characters. And, you know, it's a fun cast that Rothfuss has assembled. Good world building, nothing earth shattering. I think there's clearly very rich lore. I think Rothfuss already has sufficient notes that he could publish something like the Silmarillion. It's clear he's developed a ton of backstory and history for this world, so that's cool, even if the world itself is nothing, you know, you haven't seen before. And then the prose. So who is this book for? I'd quickly recommend it to fantasy readers. And if you're a serious fantasy reader who's steeped in high fantasy or grimdark fantasy, or, you know, some of these bigger worlds, I think that Name of the Wind will definitely strike you like YA fiction at first, with admittedly much more sophisticated prose. But bear with it, because I really think Rothfuss is doing something, and I think it's something fun, because I think he's taken, you know, he's playing almost in the sandbox of YA fiction. He's taken a lot of those conventions, and then he's elevating them. He's doing something nuanced and fun in exploring this character that is, you know, something of a chosen one figure, but in a way that I haven't seen before. It kind of like how Frank Herbert in Dune took the chosen one narrative and, you know, took a different spin on it. Said, hey, this is actually a super dangerous thing. We're really worried about this. Likewise, Rothfuss is like, hey, what if a chosen one was also just selfish? Finally, cover art. Not for me. I think it's pretty bland. Just a dude standing in a field. I get that, you know, a tree blowing is kind of a go-to way to depict wind, but no, it's a little boring. And muted color tones. If I hadn't been recommended this book, the cover art certainly would not make me pick it up off the shelf. Thank you so much for watching. I have a quick favor to ask, which is I'm new here. I'm trying to get my sea legs. So if you have any feedback, any thoughts on what I could be doing differently or better, please drop those thoughts down in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. And also, if you liked the video, please throw it a like, because the AI decides what we all get to see, but it lets us vote.